Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you all here. I'm going to figure out this thing. Here we go. If you don't know which room you're in and you're not sure if you're in the right room, this is what we're going to, our panel is on social housing and community ownership, synergetic strategies. I'm Reverend Ray Huang. I am a Presbyterian pastor as well as senior organizer at Housing Now. Housing Now is a statewide housing justice coalition in the state. We're a Big Ten organization. The California Community Land Trust Network is in fact a very active member of Housing Now. So I'm honored to be able to be a part of this panel today and really just excited to be among so many friends and colleagues who are doing the great work across the state. When I walked over, I just got in today because I was at another actually federal coalition meeting on social housing specifically yesterday in Los Angeles. So I flew in this morning and I walked in and saw the faces. I thought, gosh, this is totally my family. So I'm really grateful to be here. Yay. Shout out to our group. So what we're going to be accomplishing today, our goals are to explore the relationship between social housing and community land trusts. Somebody came up to us just a few minutes ago and said, what is social housing? I hope you'll be able to answer that by the end of this panel. If you cannot, then we have not done our job. So we're going to do our best. And if you still don't understand it or have questions afterwards, our panelists, while some of us might have to run to the next session, just come and find us. We're happy to stay in touch, answer further questions, and share with you our contact information. Also, you can just give Leo a call, and I'm sure he'll have all the answers as well. Just to answer quickly, what is social housing? Social housing, a community land trust is a form of social housing. You'll hear more about that, but social housing is specifically community owned and community managed properties and land. So that is a really quick example or answer, and we'll go into it in just a little bit. Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Apologies for my quick speech. The second goal is that we'll be introducing current advocacy campaigns to expand social housing in California and also federally. And then lastly, we'll be introducing local social housing projects and campaigns. And so you'll hear about those in this session. So I wanted to start by just sharing that social housing, like I said, is community owned and community managed land and property to make homes for people and not for profit. And that is land that is permanently off the speculative market, and so not changed by the current market interests of capitalism, if you will. Social housing, though, the way that I like to talk about it, is not new to our country. What you might be hearing in the ether of the state is a lot of folks will say social housing is something foreign, something that's brought to us from Vienna or something brought to us from Hong Kong. That is, in fact, not true. Social housing, the idea that land is owned communally and can be managed communally, is very American. What I mean by that is from our indigenous communities who lived and managed, cared for the community, their land and their communities on their own. Similarly, we have seen worker cooperatives and be able to not just own and run businesses together to be able to be economically independent, but also to live together as well. Another example is we've seen, and I'm sure you know, the history of artist communes, groups of artists who'd come together to rent together, to live and work and create together. Another example would be the freed slaves cooperatives, where they would buy plantations together after they were freed, and they would co-own and co-work the land together for their own economic independence and own livelihood. And so these are all historic examples of various forms of what I would say is the root of social housing here in the US. Since then, over the generations, we've seen and developed into what we have today. So CLT's Community Land Trust is something that has come out not of nothing, but it's come out of historic practices of our communities that are often on the margins, not only trying to survive, but finding ways to thrive. And CLTs are a model, an example of this. And this is why we should be proud of the work that we are accomplishing and will continue to do and build this out, that we're not starting from scratch, but we're really continuing a legacy of what Americans have been doing, what our residents in the US have been doing for generations. Thank you. Amen. Do a little of my preaching here. Something else I wanted to share is that we were not going to get too much into the federal work of social housing here because we just have so much that we're doing here in California and on a local scale. But I was going to actually share about that now, but I'm going to wait till the end during the Q&A section to share more about our federal work, because I think it'll provide you with a little bit more context. So for now, we're going to just get straight into it and go to our various panelists. I am really excited and honored to introduce our first panelist, Shanti Singh, who is a very close friend and comrade of mine. I think I talk to her daily at work. So I'm always happy to see her. She is a legislative analyst and communications director. I can never get your title right.
Legislative and communications director.
There we go. At Tenants Together. And I'll let you take it from here. Shanti is going to be sharing us a little bit more about the renters' rights movement and its connection to social housing, give a definition of social housing, and talk a little bit about Tenants Together's work and along with the state. Shanti, I realized I did not talk about our social housing coalition in the state. So I'm also, if you have a chance to talk about that, otherwise feel free to jump it to me. That way I know there's some interest from the group when I was chatting with folks outside during lunch that they wanted to know more about our statewide coalition on social housing.
Sweet. I will work that in.
Thanks, Shanti.
I'm also here. I have my second hat. Just shout out to all the San Francisco CLT folks in the audience, because board vice president there, after school activities, do you have this clicker? Let's get going. Okay. Oh, perfect. This is a mouthful. Let's just go. All right. So, yeah, just to start off with a baseline definition of social housing, right? Because there's a lot of talk about social housing. It's a buzzword that's going around, but the way that we think about it is it's a lot of different models, but it's sitting under these 4 core principles, right? So you have permanent, not temporary affordability. That's really important. Permanent, not temporary decommodification, just a fancy word of saying it's off the speculative market. It's not a for-profit tool. Physical and environmental accessibility and sustainability. Sometimes you see this, the principle of universality doesn't just mean universally accessible in terms of affordability, but it also means universally accessible in terms of, ability, like that that's not segregated, that it's, environmentally sustainable, that it's green, and that it's physically accessible to anyone who needs it as well. And then finally, the fourth tenet is tenant and resident empowerment and self-determination. Definitely, Tenants Together is a coalition of mostly tenant unions. So we definitely think about tenant organizing and the right to organize as a core principle, but there's obviously a lot of models of governance that kind of sit under that broader category. And so the number one thing here about so land trusts are a model of social housing, right? But it also can include limited equity housing cooperatives. It can include co-housing. And it does include public housing, which maybe we can get into more in the Q&A if we have time, but that counts. So the way that we think about it, to Ray's point about the fact that social housing is not a foreign concept, it's not about Singapore or Vienna necessarily. Those are nice places we can look at their systems, but it really is already embedded in the work that everybody here is doing. And it's embedded in the work that the housing justice movement across the country is doing, because social housing ultimately is a core demand of tenant organizing, right? Like when we're organizing as a corporate landlord or organizing against a slumlord for habitability, when we're trying to pass rent control in cities across California, when we're trying to organize tenant unions, the safety and permanency of social housing is at the end of those demands, right? I mean, it might not be the, the short-term demand when you're, say, facing a mass eviction, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it is about these 4 core tenets. It's about safety. It's about security. It's about affordability. It's about self-determination. Sorry, I'll try to talk a little slower for our interpreters. So yeah, I mean, it's really thinking about social housing as not some faraway model, but what we're already doing every single day, including everybody in this room. Oh, I have the clicker. So this is, sorry for this complicated diagram thing. But what I wanted to kind of get across here was that, there are a lot of different social housing proposals out there, and I kind of tried to put them in some buckets here. There is no one correct path. There is no one correct order to do these things. We're seeing everybody right now, given the crisis that we're in, is throwing a lot of good ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. So sort of the first bucket is sort of campaigns for funding and public investment in our housing. And this includes, I wanted to shout out some folks, some California efforts, real estate and anti-speculation taxes. We had Prop I, which was a transfer tax in San Francisco for rent relief and social housing, Measure ULA in Los Angeles, which covers a broad range of housing needs, but also specifically dedicates 20% of its revenue to alternative models of housing. SB 584, that's currently a 2-year bill. That's an attempt to tax short-term rentals in order to fund social housing across a range of models again. I also want to shout out some folks. I don't know if anyone from Inland Empire is here, but oh, nice. Yeah, shout out Inland Empire, who's actually been passing short-term rental taxes in, I believe, Palm Springs, but is doing that across the IE. So, there's these funding campaigns who have, like, many of whom have overcome tremendous real estate opposition and spending, but are still resonating with voters. There's state and local bond measures. There's actively those bond measures being proposed at the state level. And then there's budget fights, right? Like, we're having in San Francisco, where I live, we're having a budget fight over our Prop I revenue for social housing, but there's budget fights happening all over. San Jose had one, for just taking through the city and state budget cycles, cap at the state level. Sorry, I'm just zooming through these policies, but there's a lot going on. But so that's the funding bucket. Then of course there's the second piece I kind of teased out of this was government infrastructure, right? Because we have a social safety net and a welfare state that's really broken because of decades of neoliberalism and, eroding government to also erode people's trust in government. And we have to climb out of that hole. And, you see programs, I know people here know about FIP and everything, but, if there's attempts to create new public developers, that's a new idea that's popping up, not just in California, but all over the country in several states. And also, strengthening and repurposing our existing government infrastructure to build and to buy social housing. And then the last sort of bucket, like I said, there's no one right order here, but it's private market regulation, because we do need to regulate the private market to make social housing of any kind more scalable and sustainable. And that includes rent control and just cause protections. Like, we can't house people if we in social housing if we don't keep them stable in the first place. It includes things like community and tenant opportunity to purchase, first right of refusal. It includes lots of fights, not just about that are specific to housing, but about, like, keeping what is left of our public lands in public hands and actually using that land for public good. These are all fights that we're also having that chip away at the private market, or, try to restrain it a little bit so that we can, explore social housing and build it and buy it. And finally, like, I don't know if this diagram gets it across, but, this is all sitting, in my view, but it's sitting under, like, tenant organizing and community demands, right? All of these different policies and ideas and initiatives, the campaigns that are being thrown out there, they're coming out of the needs of specific communities. And, at Tenants Together, we see that they're coming out of the tenant organizing work that our member organizations are doing on the ground, right? So because there's no correct path, and this, I don't have an answer to this question, I'm just asking it, in a state as big as California, local coalitions, they're responding to different local conditions, they're choosing different strategies. So really our challenge, and I'll talk why we're trying to build a statewide social housing coalition, everybody here included on the stage, is trying to figure out how we sort of unify and support one another as much as we can, especially because, all of these, at some point, there's a lot of great local work that we can do, but, it's going to culminate, like, we need to go ask the state of California, which is the world's 4th largest economy, to step up, right? And so we need to really do that. Let's see. Okay, you do not have to read this whole thing. I do want to shout out the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley. I stole this from you, if anyone's here. But I just wanted to, these were 3 bills. They got amended. Some of them passed, some of them didn't. Don't need to get into all of that. But kind of just wanted to non-judgmentally throw out like different things that people are trying at the state level, right? I'm a little biased, but I will try not to be. But you saw 3 bills this year, one from Assemblymember Alex Lee, AB 309. That was going towards setting up a public developer. Now that got amended out, not the author's fault, but it's a very adverse environment in Sacramento. But that was basically going for, we're going to have a public developer. We're going to have it across all income ranges, not really specifying particular income ranges. But that was that bill. And then I guess I should say ours, because Tenants Together in Housing Now co-sponsored it and Janine testified for it. And so a lot of you endorsed it. Was SB 555 from Senator Aisha Wahab. And as you can see, there's like, and then we also, we didn't sponsor SB 584 from Senator Monique Limon. That bill is a 2-year, it's still alive. But we saw, I think it's very exciting, we saw 3 different social housing proposals. And the one thing to keep in mind too is like if you look at decommodification, there was complete agreement, like this housing must be off the speculative market in perpetuity. We also, in terms of self-determination, there was language in all of them. It differed slightly about residents having the right to participate in decision-making across a range of options. But you do see some differences, right, in terms of the income levels that are targeted. Is it all income levels, or, are we focusing more on the cost burden, which is still a really big spectrum of incomes in California? It includes low, no, middle income people. They saw some difference in tenant protections. Do you have the same, do we start with the same baseline tenant protections that are in the private market, or do we go beyond that, right? Do we make social housing even more secure? And so basically that's just to say there's a lot of different ideas being thrown out there, which I think is a good thing, that we're very far from getting the kind of environment that we want in Sacramento, but the fact that people are trying, and you see these bills represent like large coalitions of people. I mean, with SB 555, even though we're just studying social housing, the organizing coalition around it, I think we had like 80 groups across climate justice, CACLTN, like labor, housing justice. So you can kind of see how all of these different folks are coming together for social housing in California. This is just like our first stab, I guess. Is there anything I forgot to touch on? I don't want to go too long. Oh, wait, what part of it? Okay, we'll go back.
We'll do it later. Thanks, Shanti.
Sorry, that was a lot.
Thanks so much, Shanti. Next, we have Janine, who's gonna share about emerging Central Valley social housing campaigns and projects. We just want to give you, these are we have projects in California on social housing campaigns, also, community land trust, of course, happening all across the state. But we wanted to share in this panel, just highlight 2 models for you. And so one is going to be from the Central Valley. Janine's going to cover that. And then Jessica is going to cover the happenings in Los Angeles. So Janine, I'd love you to go next.
Hi, everyone. I feel really grateful to be here on this panel, uplifting the Central Valley and the incredible work that's happening. Before I talk about the two projects that are just really inspiring us and giving us so much energy, I want to uplift a couple of the ways Shanti just talked about. I can't see here. Strengthening and repurposing existing agencies to build and buy social housing. So we are currently doing a lot of work related to the housing element. Our coalition coming together, creating talking points, doing community education to teach folks about social housing and community land trusts, and then going together into spaces and writing letters so that we can have as a part of the housing element. It can be front and center, and it can be documented, right? That this is something that we want investments in. Some of the cities in the Central Valley have, we've been able to help form affordable housing trust funds, and we've been able to work with the city of Fresno to think about the governance structure for the Fresno trust fund. And again, like in that space, being very vocal, sharing our learnings with our city stakeholders around social housing and the different forms of social housing, and how the housing trust fund can be a really important tool for being able to provide funding to invest in these projects that are just really crucial to stabilizing housing. And then the other thing, we have been doing a lot of work on building relationship with the Fresno Housing Authority. We have a couple of years, we have a new change in leadership. And also as a part of that shift in leadership, the hiring of a diversity, equity, and inclusion director, and a process that the Housing Authority underwent to develop a strategic plan for how they were going to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that opened up an opportunity for us. And we've been building relationship and trust, and being able to come to the table, being very clear about who we are, what our values are, not willing to compromise that in any way. And we've been invited into support with the 5-year strategic plan. And so we are doing this really incredible, art-based, participatory workshops all throughout Fresno County. And we are uplifting social housing and community land trusts and the importance of all of that, and sharing all of your stories that are so inspiring to us with folks in the Valley, so that, for us, this is new territory for us. And so it's important for us to look to you all and see ourselves in the work that you're doing, and take that to our people, and us say wow, they're doing that. And those folks look like me and my community, and we could do that too. And so that has been going so incredible that now we've been invited into working with Fresno housing staff. And I also want to point out that on a panel not too long ago, a person within, I would say, a leadership position within Fresno Housing said they don't know what social housing is, but public housing authorities are and can be, right, if they are strengthened and repurposed, right, the existing systems, they can play a role in helping to build out community ownership and self-governance, right? And some other things that are truly needed for us to shift, but we're able to work with staff. And we have been invited now to work with the board. And we're doing deep root cause analysis and things that, typically and historically, we haven't been able to have those kinds of conversations with our housing authority agencies, but it's promising and we're feeling hopeful. So that work is happening. And now I'm just going to talk very briefly about two projects that we are just feeling really excited about. One is in Fresno. It's called the Peacock Community Apartment Hotel. It's a historic building in downtown Fresno in the Chinatown neighborhood. It's a property, 13 single room occupancy, co-housing model. It was acquired by an absentee slumlord who purchased the property. It was already in disrepair, but then continued to not make any investments, but collect rent from folks who didn't have an alternative. And when those folks they were spending their own money, doing, the work to try to make it as habitable as possible. And when they were, going to the landlord and asserting their rights, they were all issued with illegal eviction notices. And on that day, that week, that they were served with those notices and began to organize themselves because they knew the notices were illegal. We were launching the Fresno Tenants Union at a park nearby, and somehow, word in the valley, y'all, I don't know if you know the valley, like word travels fast. We all know each other, and so before we had ended the launch party, they had made their way to the park, and they said, illegal notice in hand, that they're mobilizing and they wanted to work with us. And so that next Monday we met them at their community, and we mounted a legal strategy to try to hold the slumlord accountable, but also to potentially position the renters, because that's what they wanted, to try to acquire the property and put it into a community land trust model. And we were somewhat successful with the legal strategy. We were able to connect them with pro bono attorney who proactively sued the landlord, and they prevailed in court and won a small settlement. But the building was red tagged, and all of the tenants were displaced. And the settlement that they received, $2,500, was enough for 2 weeks worth of a motel. There were no options. We went to all of the homeless service providers, and there were no options for relocation. And so we found ourselves working with the community to buy tents with the $2,500, to buy things that would prepare them to be unhoused. We're still building. Tina and Janelle are the two courageous, incredible resident leaders who are actively homeless and still organizing to win this property and put it into a CLT. And along this journey, we got invited. We happened to be all the way in Vienna, Austria, with our mayor, who we tried to educate about the community land trust option with the mobile home park that we were mobilizing with. And there was no convincing our city government at that time. And we were in Vienna, and they took us similar to the community land trust network, taking us on those buses to see firsthand the incredible work that's happening. And our mayor, when we came back to the meetup spot, I mean, it was like he was making a beeline right for me, and I saw him coming, and he walked right up to me and he said, "I get it." I have a huge knot in my throat right now because it was too late for the mobile home park. This real estate speculator acquired the property, and every single thing that we said was going to happen at the hands of Harmony Communities has happened, and folks are still organizing there. But he said, "I get it. I understand now." And I think this is being recorded, so I won't say what my little thought bubble popped in my mind. But I said, well, it may be too late for the mobile home park, but we've got another community. We've got the Peacock Apartment Hotel community. And then the next morning, as a good organizer does, in a public gathering with folks of every level of governance, we got to share out something that had resonated with us. And I took my opportunity and got on the microphone and publicly thanked and asked the mayor to follow through on his commitment to convert the Peacock Hotel into a community land trust. And when we returned, we convened with folks from the city and the housing authority, and we have a commitment from the city to pay $1 million to acquire the property and take it from the slumlord. And we still have Tina and Janelle, who, although they are unhoused, They are actively still organizing, and we are moving forward. And there's been connections that were made here because we've experienced, it's slow and there's barriers because we don't have all the infrastructure that we need for this to happen. But we've met folks here that are willing and wanting to partner, and now all of a sudden we've got momentum and we're moving again on that project, and I feel really excited and grateful. And then am I out of time? Okay, darn. Let me just in a really quick 2 minutes. The other community is a farm working community in Lodi. And there's an incredible clergy leader, Pastor Nelson Rabel, who is working alongside members of his congregation and painting an incredible vision for social housing, cooperative farming, not only for food sovereignty, but to build, right, to grow and harvest and manufacture eventually green building solutions that will, right, create the kind of economic and environmental justice and social justice, all the intersections of that beautiful, beautiful model. And we're really excited about that and looking forward to coming back here and being one of those folks, right? Being here and showing their case studies of the wins and their journey with you all. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Janine. Thank you so much. And I realized I didn't introduce you in the beginning because we're friends. And so it's just like the view, you just go right into it. No, I guess we check. But Janine Nkosi is organizer and director of Faith in the Valley, which is
Director of Housing Justice.
Director of Housing Justice. She's a director. Director of Housing Justice at Faith in the Valley, and also a sociology professor. And so she really comes with a lot of information and, as you can see, heart in this work. But you did highlight two things that I just want to flag for now, and maybe we can have a conversation later, which is really this relationship between climate change or environmental justice and housing through specifically what people have termed green social housing. And the idea is that we have to work together because ultimately we know that 25% of carbon emissions comes from housing. And so if you really want to seek a future together, it needs to be both housing and climate working together to ensure that the housing we build is going to be able to be sustainable and climate resilient for our communities, and also be stable for our communities in terms of housing itself. So, so thank you for bringing that up in the end, as well as this relationship again between labor and housing, working together, knowing that just like we have historically, worker cooperatives where they're also finding housing cooperatives, it's the same work that we're doing now. So thank you for those examples in Central Valley. So appreciate you, Janine. And next, I'm very excited to introduce you to Jessica Melendez, who is the Director of Policy, also a director here at Trust South LA, who's going to give us more information about what's happening in the world of social housing in Los Angeles.
Sorry, if I can get the presentation to work. Hold on one second. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So like mentioned, my name is Jessica Melendez. I'm with Trust South LA. I'll be talking a little bit more or focusing more on Measure ULA in the city of Los Angeles. So last year, a very nice gift was handed to the city of LA. It was packaged and wrapped by several housing advocates, labor unions, legal service agencies, community land trusts, and several other housing and homelessness folks or experts in the city of LA. And that was Measure ULA. So Measure ULA was a one-time tax on the sale of properties over 4 million. And the hope was that with that money, it would generate upwards of over 600 million a year. And 70% of those of the funds used for that, 70% of the funds used would go towards affordable housing production or affordable housing programs. And then the other 30% would go towards homelessness prevention programs. And so today I want to focus a lot more on the affordable housing piece, right? There's 4 different programs within Measure ULA that are centered on affordable housing. The first is around multifamily multifamily program that just kind of essentially provides gap financing to projects that are already on the works so that we can get more units online of affordable housing. And then the three other ones are around alternative models, which are social housing. The other is around the acquisition rehab program, developing a functional NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing preservation program within the city of LA. And then the third is around capacity building. So this would give capacity building trainings, modules, materials, resources to developers and to tenants on how to establish tenant associations, tenant unions, but also begin the process of, really enhancing the role of tenants in their own management of their property, right? Giving community control over buildings. And the unique thing about these last three programs is that they all kind of carry out the vision of community land trust, right? The two core components are giving authority to community residents, giving them the authority to have control over their building and their land, and then also keeping them affordable in perpetuity, right? Meaning for forever. And so those are the two main components that really drive a lot of this vision forward. Where unfortunately this first fiscal year, these three different programs were not financed, but we're still pushing, and that's kind of what I want to get into as well, right? Some of the challenges of that we've faced as Measure ULA has been passed and implemented. So with some of the challenges that we faced are that, while the tenants and many advocates in Los Angeles are pushing for these several different programs that uphold the vision of community land trust and social housing, the city has not exactly done this before, right? This is the first time that the city of LA does this, although they will argue and say, like they have in the past, that they've done acquisition and rehab, and that is false. That is not true. This will be the first time that they do something like this. But as folks know, the LA Community Land Trust Coalition and several other organizations have been leading a lot of these efforts for several years now. Them, ACT LA, the LA Housing Movement Lab, and other coalitions have been at the spearheading a lot of these movements. And so that's also what I want to focus on as well, is that this isn't something just solely done by Community Land Trust, but it's taken a lot of other coalitions and other community-based organizations really moving the needle on this, and holding people at the city accountable. And so some of the challenges, well, Measure ULA is innovative in that, it's also considered a mansion tax, right? We're taxing properties that are over $4 million. The real estate, real estate has just been kind of scared and fearful, right? What does that mean for the real estate industry? And so at one point, they were kind of holding out. They were freezing the market essentially. So in the month of April 1st, as a matter of fact, the taxes started to be collected, and we saw a spike in some sales of mansions, but then we also saw a dip, and that was because they were really trying to hold out and freeze the market. And we expected this, right? We expected this from the real estate industry. Howard Jarvis and his friends ended up, doing or trying to place something on the ballot measure, which will actually be on the ballot measure sometime next year, that would essentially repeal the mechanism for which we were able to get Measure ULA even on the ballot in the first place, which is the Citizens Initiative. Another thing that they've done as well is just they've also there's been about 3 lawsuits, one at the federal level and 2 at the state. The 2 at the state have been consolidated, and actually will be heard on October 23rd at 8 a.m. at the Stanley Moss Courthouse. So if folks want to join us on that day. And then the federal court case has been dismissed, thankfully. So a lot of challenges, a lot of resistance, a lot of opposition, as folks know, but the community has remained firm, right? Community has remained firm in the process. Coalitions, not just the United to House LA Coalition, ACT LA, Fideicomiso, I saw some folks over there, Beverly, Vermont as well, have continued to engage community members around just spreading awareness and political education as to what social housing can mean, and what it could look like, right? I know Eva, I don't know if she's here, but she's always at the forefront, right? Really calling for this, especially during public comment, right? In a very animated voice, right? Making sure that folks at the city level, right? Not just like the different housing departments, but also electeds understand like what this new possibility can look like. And so these different organizations have been on the ground doing the work to kind of socialize and educate community members. And at the advocacy level, we've been meeting with several stakeholders within the LA Housing Department, the mayor's office, and several other agencies, elected offices, to continue to push for a lot of these innovative grassroots, not innovative because these have been, you know, solutions that have already been emerging for a while now, but these really grassroots, community-driven solutions, right? And so we've been meeting. We're working these next couple of weeks to really push forward and generate more support for both alternative models and acquisition rehab and capacity building. And some of these the successes of this program has also been due to the LA Community Land Trust Coalition and their ability to launch a LA County pilot program, which was able to acquire about 8 different properties across the county of LA, and stabilizing about 110 units of housing at a remarkable rate of time, using only one subsidy source. And so we have very successful stories of success at the county level, and we want to continue replicating those models, not just across the county, but also within the city of LA. And I'll kind of touch on other agencies that are in the works as well. And then I also want to bring our attention about, go ahead. Oh, that's fine. We can stay on this one. And then what I also want to bring to call our attention on is that aside from the coalitions that have been that I've named, right, we also included or extended invitation, right, to labor unions, right? If folks have seen, unless you were sleeping, several like hot labor summer, as folks called it in LA at least, right? Several unions going on strike, calling attention to just the disparity between, you know, wages and also the rate at which people can afford housing, right? So we've extended an invitation to them as well, to several unions, many of which, you know, also called attention to the lack of affordability of housing in the city of LA or the LA County. And so now they've also kind of put into their demands for common good elements of social housing. So a couple weeks ago, the Fix LA Coalition partnered with ACT LA and several other organizations and coalitions to put forward their list of demands, which included social housing, and they were also calling for you know, establishing 8,000 units of social housing over the course of the next few years, right? On top of that, we also have collaborations with Metro in Los Angeles with their joint development program. ACT LA has also been pioneering that effort to establish, I believe, 10,000 homes over the next, or 10,000 homes by 2031, and some of which can incorporate social housing, right? And so ACT LA, the LA or Community Land Trust within the LA area, and several other organizations that are allies have been meeting with Metro and other developers to create this bench of developers that can create social housing and establish get more social housing online, right? And so this is all kind of emerging, and we're trying to do our best to change the landscape in the city of LA and in the county. And then I don't have a slide on this, but what I also want to talk about is just okay, I'll just wrap up. Yeah, so we're also, as we're, you know, pushing for these policies to advocate more for programs like acquisition rehab or social housing, we're also in the process of creating more new infrastructure, right? Whether that looks like the capacity building program, which can essentially become the LA Housing Training Hub, or La Casa, right? Last year, SB 679 passed, which established the LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. Zarita is here somewhere, and not in this room, and in some other room, but Zarita's here. And if folks know Zarita, she sits on the board and has been very influential in kind of developing the vision for that agency, which holds 3 pillars, which is production, preservation, and protections. And it's also to kind of elevate the fact that we shouldn't invest in just one solution. It's about investing in all 3 solutions at the same time. And acknowledging that preservation is it isn't in a way protecting tenants. It's a form of protection and it's a form of production, right? We're getting more affordable housing units online and making sure that they're at deep affordability levels and in perpetuity. So I'll wrap with that.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I hope you all have gotten a chance to hear a snippet of all the various social housing campaigns that are happening, can be happening, models of how we can build together. I wanted to share a little bit before we go into a Q&A section about sort of how we're working collectively across the state on social housing. The CACLT network is actually a member of the Social Housing Steering Committee in the state, which lives under the Housing Now Coalition umbrella, which is the coalition that I work for. And what that is a group of organizations and partners who have come together actually in a very grassroots organic way a number of years ago to work collectively on trying to build the social housing movement here in the state. A little background is in 2019, Richard Marcantonio gathered some people just to talk briefly about, not briefly, for a few hours probably, about social housing to see what we could do to really support the efforts that had been led for some time by you all on the ground in building these community land trusts and other forms of social housing across the state. To see how we could collectively work together in the state to advocate for this and to grow this movement and to bring resources for CLTs to nourish and thrive. And out of that, then a group gathered together after Assembly Member Alex Lee started the Office for the Select Committee on Social Housing in the Assembly of the state. He started that committee, but what we recognize as the community, as the organizations in the state, was that our voices were not heard, that while we were doing the social housing work on the ground, we had state leaders determining and defining what social housing would look like for us. And so we gathered together, wrote a letter and gave it to the Select Committee to help them understand what our definition of social housing is, and then started working collaboratively with state leaders, or tried to, I should say more specifically, to work with state leaders to help them understand what's happening on the ground. We are still in that process. And so CACLT's network's participation in this leadership group is what has helped make SB 555 pass this year. So huge celebration to you all for the efforts you've also put in, as well as the other bills that you all have led as a CLT network. And also so that is a state leadership, that is a state group that your voices are centered in and a part of. I also wanted to share about another way that we also are collectivizing our work to expand social housing in the state is also our work on a federal level. Housing Now, it's kind of like nesting Russian dolls, is also often how Shanti has put it. Housing Now sits on a coalition called the Alliance for Housing Justice, where various organizations across the country come together to work on advancing the social housing movement in the country. And a couple of those things that we have been working on, to just give you a taste, is we are researching and looking into how we can use LIHTC, so the low-income housing tax credits, towards social housing funding. And also we are in the process of trying to advocate for an Office of Social Housing in the federal government. We are also advocating for $100 million of federal social housing planning grants, and also working on communication efforts to help educate folks on what social housing is to be able to expand our work across the country. So this is all work that you all are engaged in, and I wanted to just put that into context for you all as we're thinking about this work. So now that I've shared with you a little bit of this, I would love to go back to our panelists and ask a couple questions. The first is, if we can go, Shanti, actually back to that slide where you talked about the different components of social housing. I think that's a great context for us to look at while we're asking these questions. The first is on the side of tenant organizing and also private market regulation. There's been a lot of work and effort. Should I slow down? There's been a lot of work and effort and energy recently led by a lot of groups to be able to lead corporate landlord campaigns. So against their landlord to, for example, exposing Blackstone's ownership of actually, they are the largest landlord. Did you know that? They're the largest landlord in the US of student housing and of the US and I've even heard of the world. Okay, Alex is giving me a yes, so that's definitely true, which is crazy. And they are a private equity company. And so to expose their ownership, their harassment techniques, their participation in just influencing the market and of turning our homes into profit and evicting and encouraging, if not participating greatly in increasing our homelessness numbers in the state and in the country and world, apparently, because that's how big their reach is. And so I would love to see if any of you have, can maybe say a little bit about some of the landlord campaigning efforts that you all are engaged in its participation in the social housing movement and building, and why that's a piece of this work here.
So I guess on behalf of tenants together, I'll shout out a couple examples. One, where I live in San Francisco, the Veritas Tenants Committee. Veritas is San Francisco's largest corporate landlord. They own hundreds of buildings. They tend to buy rent-controlled properties. They've been sued many times, but the Housing Rights Committee, the Veritas Tenants Committee is sort of their association is a kind of a spin-off of that, but it's, tenants in buildings across San Francisco. It's a citywide tenant union. And they have been, not only have they gone on, rent strike, they've gone on debt strike and won, they were instrumental in passing a tenants' rights to organize ordinance, but they also have demanded many times that Veritas properties be acquired by the city or by a nonprofit, but taken off the speculative market. So that's kind of it is in my backyard, so it's one of my favorite examples to mention, because they've done amazing work, and that's a great example of tenant organizing, integrating and leading into social housing demands. But I also want to shout out the Los Angeles Tenants Union, Latu, another TT member. They have been organizing against a slumlord. They organize against many slumlords, but there's a tenant in a complex called Hillside Villa. And those tenants have been fighting to get the city to forcibly buy their property back from the slumlord. And it's not over yet, but even the fact that I think the LA City Council voted to preliminarily approve that, which I think is the first time that we've seen the city a government institution actually not quite expropriate, but take back, or set the stage for taking back housing, forcibly, but at the behest of the tenants. I think that hasn't probably happened in 40, 50 years, right? And certainly there's eminent domain comes with a lot of understandable stigma because it's associated with urban renewal, but in the hands of actual tenants demanding that their housing be taken away from slumlords. Those are two examples that are very inspiring, but far from all the work that our member organizations are doing.
Thanks. So we don't have a lot of time left. We have about 6 minutes. I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity for Q&A from you all, because I know that I imagine you might have some questions or some thoughts and reflections on what you heard. And so, yeah, I just wanted to see if any of you have any questions that you might want to pose. Yes. Oh.
There's slumlords, you have net going to sell your building towards the upkept by the city or by the county, ultimately transferred to the tenants, so the tenants don't have to deal with the city. Because I know Hillside Villa, yeah, they won on one hand, but on the other hand, they're dealing with all the BS of the red tape, and I don't get it. I feel very fortunate, the corporate attendance that we've gone through. I feel very lucky that we don't have to deal with that. Hillside, I feel bad for them because I know their buildings are in disrepair. They're in much worse situation. And how do we support Hillside via, first of all, right? And then second of all, how do we replicate a mandatory policy that forces them to sell? If you're not going to take care of the building, you shouldn't own it. I always tell people, we're not talking about bubble gum and shoes. We're talking about housing that people depend on. It's a basic living, basic right that we should have. So.
I want to know the answer to that also. I'm going to pass it back to Shanti. And one of the reasons is because in the Central Valley, we have one of the largest slumlords in the entire state of California, whose property portfolios date back to, the early 1900s and have just swelled. And then, the foreclosure crisis hits the Central Valley really hard and those portfolios swell. And so, yeah, I need to know the answer to that too. Shanti, what do you got for us?
I mean, as with everything that, if I talk about anything that happens in state law or Sacramento, which I'm going to be on a state law panel after this, but it's grindingly slow and incremental. But there have been efforts to basically reform the receivership process. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but they're very slow going, but I do think that there's opportunities at the state level where we just need to there's, I don't know how necessarily that may or may not integrate or strengthen with statewide proposals to have a baseline for TOPA and COPA, right? But I could see those intersecting. That's ongoing. That's a TOPA COPA is a 2-year bill, but I'm still getting my head around receivership and code enforcement law at the state level, but I don't think there have been folks who are trying to actually change that process by which, it would be easier for all of us here to basically take over. And I know that doesn't fully address your question, because ideally we shouldn't let slumlords drive housing into disrepair or own housing in the first place. But I those are some of the ideas that I've been seeing at the state level, at least.
And I can also answer that in that you've probably are aware of many of the tenant anti-harassment ordinances that are out there, tenant bill of rights. Those are all forms and policies on a local level that's been pushed to be able to expose those slumlords and to demonstrate and push back on what they're doing. And that is not only building awareness, it's building protections for tenants, but that is a very strong form of organizing that's leading into what we need and what we're building on in social housing, so we can get to a point where we can use eminent domain to be able to remove them forcefully from landlords. Berlin is well known internationally for having passed an eminent domain law where if a corporate landlord owns more than X number of buildings and they have to give it back to the state. I know that there's been a lot of challenges to that, and there's still a lot of organizing that is still happening in Berlin, but that's an example. And then lastly, your question of how to support Hillside Villa. I will tell you right now that to make a very long story short, because we don't have much time, they were able to get the city to be able to commit funding to be able to buy that building from the landlord, but the landlord, as many landlords do, pulled a fast one, prevented them from being able to purchase it. And then now the landlord is actively evicting tenants, and they are going piece by piece by piece. And the tenants are pushing back and trying to pull together, but they really need support right now. So I will talk to Leo about how I can get information to you all, because there's specific ways right now where you can participate through social media advocacy for those who are nearby to come and attend some of their actions. But paying attention, and then also seeing where you all are pushing in your own localities, build that narrative and show that it's not just one place in LA, but across the state, across the country, we experience the same thing, is really the way that we can build together. So my last piece of how to support is also by coming together around corporate landlords to expose what they're doing. And there's a Blackstone campaign right now being led by the California Common Good, which is labor and housing justice organizations and partners coming together around pushing back on Blackstone and exposing them. And so that's also another way to be able to, again, bring publicly awareness of these things that are happening. And one more.
I want to add something because there's an ask. We've got to see folks that are doing really incredible research and creating like policy briefs and things that we can use. We're big advocates for receivership, like stepping in and acquiring these properties. And we learned the really, really hard way that the California receivership group is disgusting and evil. And we need people who are going to do the research to help us figure out how we're going to dismantle that and then create the public, right, receivership program that we absolutely need. So where are those? There was somebody with a PhD candidate out there that did some really great work. We need you on this, please.
Thanks. It is already time, but I know that I saw another hand go up with a question. Okay. But feel free to, we'll hang out for a minute here. If you have any more questions, I really hope this isn't the only time we'll have these conversations, but that this will continue. Thank you for being here. And yeah, si se puede. We can do this. We are doing it and we will do it. So thank you so much, friends.
Okay, there were no more questions, but that's cool. That we need